I still remember the smell of vanilla air freshener in our blue SUV that morning. Mom had sprayed it 3 times before we left, like she always did when we were going somewhere special. I was 12, clutching my pink backpack against my chest in the back seat, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood disappear behind us. "Where are we going again?" I asked, pressing my face against the cool window. Dad caught my eyes in the rearview mirror, that same grin he wore when he was planning one of his elaborate pranks on my older brother Jake. "It's going to be an adventure, sweetie." Mom turned around, her smile stretching a little too wide. "You're going to love it, Sarah. It's educational." Something about the way she said educational made my stomach twist, but I pushed the feeling down. My parents were fun parents. Everyone said so. They threw the best birthday parties, planned surprise trips to amusement parks, and always had some new game or activity planned for our family time. This was just another one of their surprises. The drive seemed longer than usual. We passed the exit for Six Flags, then the one for the beach. My excitement started mixing with confusion as we entered parts of the city I'd never seen before. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky, and people rushed along crowded sidewalks carrying briefcases and coffee cups. "Are we going to a museum?" I tried again, but Dad just cranked up the radio. Mom pulled down the visor mirror and reapplied her lipstick, the same coral shade she wore to church and parent-teacher conferences. She kept glancing at Dad, sharing looks I couldn't decode. The kind of looks adults share when they think kids aren't paying attention. The SUV finally slowed as we approached a massive building with columns and endless streams of people flowing in and out like ants. A sign read Grand Central Terminal in bold letters across the top. "A train station?" I asked, genuinely confused now. "Are we taking a train somewhere?" Dad parked in a loading zone, hazard lights blinking. "Not exactly, sweetheart." Mom twisted around to face me, her coral lips still stretched in that odd smile. "Sarah, honey, you know how we've always said you're our smart, independent girl?" I nodded, though something cold was settling in my chest. "Well, we thought it would be fun to test that independence. Like a game." Dad's eyes met mine in the mirror again, but this time his grin looked different, sharper. "Think of it as a treasure hunt, kiddo. The treasure is home, and you're going to figure out how to get there all by yourself." The cold feeling spread through my whole body. "I don't understand." Mom reached back and patted my knee. "It's simple, baby. We're going to drop you off here, and you're going to use that brilliant little brain of yours to find your way home, just like in those adventure books you love so much." But I don't have money for a train, and I don't know which train goes home." Dad chuckled, the sound echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "That's the challenge. You'll figure it out. You're resourceful." Mom dug through her purse and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "Here's your starting fund. Think of it as your adventure budget." My hands shook as I took the money. This felt wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. "Can't you just tell me which train to take?" "That would defeat the purpose," Mom said, her voice taking on that patient tone she used when explaining why I couldn't have ice cream for breakfast. "Besides, what's the fun in that?" Dad put the car in park and turned around fully. "Look, Sarah, you're always complaining that we treat you like a baby, that we don't trust you with real responsibilities. Well, here's your chance to prove you're as grown-up as you think you are." I felt tears building behind my eyes. "I never said I wanted this kind of responsibility." "Oh, don't be dramatic." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "It's just a little adventure. Other kids would kill for this kind of freedom." Dad opened his door. "Come on, let's get you set up." The next few minutes felt like a nightmare wrapped in cheerful wrapping paper. Dad helped me out of the car, shouldering my backpack like this was the most normal thing in the world. Mom kept chattering about how exciting this was going to be, how proud they'd be when I figured it out, how this would be a story we'd laugh about for years. We stood at the entrance to Grand Central, the massive space opening up before us like a cavern. People rushed past us in every direction, their footsteps echoing off the high ceiling. The information board displayed dozens of destinations I'd never heard of, times that meant nothing to me, track numbers that might as well have been in a foreign language. "Remember, Dad said, adjusting the straps of my backpack. "You're a smart girl. Trust your instincts." Mom bent down and kissed my forehead, her coral lipstick leaving a sticky residue. "We'll see you when you get home, baby, however long that takes." "But what if I can't figure it out?" The words came out smaller than I intended. Dad ruffled my hair. "Then I guess you'll have to get creative, won't you?" They were walking away. Actually, walking away. I stood frozen, watching their familiar figures weave through the crowd toward the exit. "Wait!" I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the echoing announcements and rushing commuters. I saw Dad's hand find Mom's lower back as they disappeared through the doors. I caught a glimpse of Mom throwing her head back in laughter at something he said. They looked relieved, happy even. And I was alone. The $20 bill felt damp in my sweaty palm as I stood there, people flowing around me like I was a rock in a stream. The information board might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. I'd never taken public transportation alone. I'd never been in the city without my parents. I didn't even know what direction home was from here. I found a bench near the information desk and sat down, pulling my backpack onto my lap like a shield. Maybe this was just the first part of the surprise. Maybe they were watching from somewhere, timing how long it would take me to figure out the puzzle. Maybe there was a clue I was missing, but as minutes turned into an hour, then 2 hours, the reality started settling in like cement in my stomach. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a test. This was something else entirely. I watched families reunite at the arrival gates. Grandparents hugging grandchildren, couples kissing hello. Business travelers being picked up by drivers holding signs with their names. Everyone had someone coming for them. Everyone except me. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows shifted from bright white to golden, then to orange. My stomach growled, and I realized I'd skipped lunch in my excitement for our adventure. The $20 could buy food, but what if I needed it for a train ticket? What if I spent it wrong and then had no way to get home at all? A security guard walked by for the 3rd time, and I ducked my head, pretending to dig through my backpack. What would happen if they realized I was alone? Would they call my parents? Would my parents even answer? That thought hit me like ice water. What if I called home and they just didn't pick up? But I had to try. I found a payphone near the bathrooms and dialed our home number with shaking fingers. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, someone picked up. "Hello?" It was Mom's voice, but different somehow. Casual. Unworried. Mom, it's me. I'm still at the train station. I don't know how to get home. Can you please come get me?" There was a pause, then a sound that might have been Dad laughing in the background. "I'm sorry," Mom said, her voice taking on a strange, formal quality. "I think you have the wrong number." "Mom, it's Sarah, your daughter. Please, I need help." The line went dead. I stared at the receiver in my hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry wasp. She'd hung up on me. My own mother had pretended not to know who I was and hung up on me. I called back immediately. This time, the phone rang and rang and rang until an automated voice told me to leave a message. I called again. Same thing. They'd taken the phone off the hook. The truth hit me all at once, so hard it knocked the breath out of my lungs. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a test. This wasn't going to end with them picking me up and laughing about my adventure over dinner. They had abandoned me. My own parents had driven me to a train station in a city I didn't know, given me $20, and abandoned me. And when I called for help, they'd pretended I didn't exist. I slumped against the wall next to the payphone, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. The busy sounds of the terminal, announcements, footsteps, conversations, became a blur of white noise. I felt like I was drowning in the middle of a crowd. How long had they been planning this? The careful way they'd packed my backpack that morning, making sure I had everything I needed for the day. The way they'd insisted I wear my most comfortable walking shoes. The strange looks they'd been sharing during the drive. This hadn't been spontaneous. This had been calculated. But why? What had I done that was so terrible they couldn't stand to have me in their family anymore? I tried to think of recent fights, recent punishments, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I was a good kid. I got decent grades. I did my chores. I didn't get in trouble at school. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't bad enough to deserve this. Unless I was. Unless there was something fundamentally wrong with me that I couldn't see but they could. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I'd been the problem all along and they'd finally reached their breaking point. The thought made me feel sick, but it was the only explanation that made sense. Good families didn't abandon their children at train stations. Good parents didn't drive away laughing while their 12-year-old daughter stood confused and scared in a place she'd never been before, which meant either my family wasn't good or I wasn't worth keeping. And if my own parents didn't want me, who would? The sun was setting now, painting the terminal in long shadows. I'd been sitting on this bench for almost 6 hours, and nobody had come for me. Nobody was coming for me. I thought about Jake, my older brother. Did he know where I was? Had they told him this was happening, or would he just come home from his friend's house to find my room empty and my parents acting like I'd never existed? Would he ask about me, or would he just accept that Sarah was gone now and life would go on without her? Maybe he'd be relieved. Maybe they all would be. Maybe I'd been dragging the family down without realizing it, and now they could finally be happy without the burden of their difficult daughter. The terminal was emptying out as the evening commuter rush ended. The families had been reunited, the business travelers had caught their trains, and soon it would just be me and the overnight crowd. I'd seen them already, the people who clearly lived here, who'd made the terminal their home because they had nowhere else to go. Was that what I was now? Homeless? The word felt too big and too scary to fit in my head. Homeless kids were on TV commercials asking for donations. They were other people's problems, not me. I had a bedroom with purple walls and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I had a desk where I did my homework and a bookshelf full of fantasy novels and a jewelry box that played Fury Lease when you opened it. But none of that was mine anymore, apparently. That room belonged to the daughter they'd wanted to keep. I was someone else now, the daughter they'd thrown away. I must have fallen asleep on the bench because the next thing I knew, someone was gently shaking my shoulder. A woman in a uniform was looking down at me with concerned eyes. "Honey, are you okay? Are you here with someone?" I blinked up at her, my neck stiff from sleeping sitting up. The terminal was much quieter now, most of the shops closed. Only a few people scattered around waiting for late trains. My voice came out as a croak. My parents dropped me off here. They said I had to find my own way home. The woman's expression shifted from concern to something harder to read. "How old are you, sweetheart?" 12. She muttered something under her breath that I couldn't quite catch, but it didn't sound happy. "What's your name?" "Sarah Thompson." "Okay, Sarah. I'm Officer Martinez with Transit Police. Can you tell me your parents' names and phone number?" I gave her the information, though something inside me already knew what would happen when she called. Sure enough, after a brief conversation, she hung up the phone with a frown. "They said they don't have a daughter named Sarah and that I must have the wrong number." The casual cruelty of it hit me again, fresh and sharp. They were really going to pretend I didn't exist, even to police officers. "But I do exist," I whispered. "I am their daughter." Officer Martinez sat down next to me on the bench. "I believe you, honey, and I'm going to help you figure this out. But first, when's the last time you ate something?" I couldn't remember. The morning felt like a lifetime ago. "Come on," she said, standing up and offering me her hand. "Let's get you some food and somewhere safe to sleep tonight. Tomorrow, we'll work on getting you home." But as I followed her through the nearly empty terminal, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, I realized something that felt both terrifying and oddly liberating. I didn't want to go home anymore. Home was a place where parents could decide their 12-year-old daughter was too much trouble and abandon her like an unwanted pet. Home was a place where love was conditional and could be revoked without warning. Home was a place where I would always be waiting for the next time they decided I wasn't worth keeping. Whatever happened next, wherever Officer Martinez was taking me, it had to be better than going back to people who could look at their own child and decide she was disposable. As we walked toward the exit, I looked back once at the bench where I'd spent the day. Somewhere in those long, confused, terrifying hours, the Sarah who had climbed into the blue SUV that morning had died. I didn't know who I was going to become instead, but I knew one thing for certain. I was never going to let anyone make me feel this worthless again. The 12-year-old who had trusted her parents completely, who had believed family meant forever, who had thought love was something you could count on, that girl was gone. What they'd find 20 years later would be someone else entirely, someone who had learned the hardest lesson a child can learn, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from, and sometimes being abandoned is actually being set free. The Hendersons changed everything. I'd been bounced through 3 foster homes in 2 years when I landed on their doorstep at 14. By then, I'd perfected the art of being invisible, quiet enough not to cause trouble, helpful enough to be useful, detached enough that it wouldn't hurt when they inevitably decided I was too much work. But Martha Henderson took one look at me standing in her doorway with my single duffel bag and said, "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? I hope you like chocolate chip pancakes because I make them every Sunday and that's tomorrow." It was such a normal thing to say, such a family thing to say. I almost started crying right there on her front porch. The Hendersons had 2 biological children, twin boys who were away at college, and they'd been fostering kids for 15 years. Their house felt lived in rather than perfect, with family photos covering every surface and a kitchen that always smelled like something delicious was baking. "Sarah, honey," Martha said during my first week there, finding me washing dishes after dinner without being asked, "You don't have to earn your place here. You belong here just because you're here." I didn't believe her at first. I couldn't. In my experience, belonging was always conditional, always temporary, always one mistake away from evaporating. But the Hendersons were patient with my walls and gentle with my fears, and slowly, carefully, they taught me what a real family looked like. It was Jim Henderson who first said the words that cracked something open in my chest. I'd been with them for 6 months when he found me crying in the kitchen after a nightmare about the train station. Instead of telling me to toughen up or get over it, he sat down at the table and said, "You know, Sarah, what your birth parents did to you, that wasn't about you. That was about them." "But I must have done something wrong," I whispered. "Kids don't get abandoned for no reason." Jim's face went hard in a way I'd never seen before. "Listen to me very carefully. There is nothing a 12-year-old child could do that would justify what they did to you. Nothing. They didn't abandon you because you were bad. They abandoned you because they were broken." It was the first time an adult had ever validated my anger instead of trying to fix it. The first time someone had said out loud that what happened to me was wrong, not just unfortunate or complicated, but wrong. "Real parents don't test their children's survival skills for entertainment," Martha added from the doorway, her voice shaking with fury I'd never heard from her before. "Real parents don't abandon their babies and then pretend they don't exist. What they did was cruel and unforgivable, and I need you to understand that it says everything about them and nothing about you." That night, for the first time in 2 years, I let myself feel truly angry. Not the confused, self-blaming hurt I'd been carrying, but clean, righteous anger at 2 adults who had failed their most basic responsibility as parents. The anger was terrifying and liberating at the same time. With the Hendersons' support, I started seeing Dr. Rebecca Chin, a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. Dr. Chin had a way of asking questions that made me think about my experience differently. "Sarah, if you heard about another child being abandoned at a train station by their parents, what would you think about those parents?" "That they were monsters," I answered without hesitation. "But when it's your story, you blame yourself. Why do you think that is?" It took months of therapy to understand how my 12-year-old brain had protected itself by taking responsibility for my abandonment. If it was my fault, then I had some control. If I could figure out what I'd done wrong, I could make sure it never happened again. But if it was random, if it was just because my parents were capable of cruelty, then the world was a terrifying place where children could be discarded without warning. Children will blame themselves for anything rather than accept that their parents don't love them, Dr. Chen explained. "It's a survival mechanism. But you're not 12 anymore, Sarah. You can handle the truth now." The truth was that some people should never have children. The truth was that my parents had looked at their 12-year-old daughter and decided she was expendable. The truth was that they'd driven away from that train station and gone on with their lives, while I spent 6 hours believing I was going to die alone in a city I didn't know. The truth was unforgivable, and accepting that was what finally set me free. By the time I turned 16, I'd made a decision that would have horrified my 12-year-old self. I never wanted to see my birth parents again. Not to confront them, not to demand explanations, not to try to rebuild a relationship. I wanted them to stay in the past where they belonged. When social services offered to facilitate contact, I declined. When they tracked down relatives who might want to take me in, I said no thank you. The Hendersons were my family now. They were the ones who came to parent-teacher conferences and school plays. They were the ones who taught me to drive and helped me with college applications and held me when I cried over my first heartbreak. "Are you sure about this?" my caseworker asked when I aged out of the system at 18. "Sometimes people want closure." "I am closed," I told her. I closed that chapter when I was 14 and realized that some doors should stay shut. I threw myself into building the life I wanted instead of mourning the one I'd lost. I studied psychology at State University, fascinated by the resilience of the human mind, and determined to help other kids who'd been failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them. I graduated summa cum laude, got my master's degree in clinical psychology, and started working at a residential treatment center for traumatized children. I met David during my residency at Children's Hospital. He was a pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and steady hands, and when I told him my story, years into our relationship, when I finally trusted him enough to share it, he held me while I cried and then said, "I'm so glad you found your way out of that darkness. The world is better because you survived." We married when I was 28, in the Hendersons' backyard with Martha crying happy tears and Jim walking me down the aisle. I kept my last name, Thompson, not because I wanted to honor my birth family, but because it represented the person I'd become despite them. Sarah Thompson was someone who'd survived abandonment and built a life worth living. I wasn't about to erase her. Our daughter Emma was born 2 years later, followed by our son Michael. From the moment I held Emma in my arms, I understood on a cellular level how completely unnatural my parents' behavior had been. The idea of abandoning this perfect, trusting little person was so horrific it made me physically sick. "How?" I asked David one night, watching Emma sleep in her crib. "How do you look at something this precious and decide to throw it away?" "You don't," he said simply. "Healthy people don't. That's how you know they weren't healthy." I built my practice around helping families heal from trauma. I specialized in attachment disorders and became known for my work with children who'd been abandoned or severely neglected. Other therapists sent me their most challenging cases. Kids who'd been failed so thoroughly by adults that they'd given up on the possibility of safe relationships. I understood these children in ways that couldn't be taught in graduate school. I knew what it felt like to have your fundamental trust in the world shattered. I knew the specific pain of realizing that the people who brought you into existence viewed you as disposable. And I knew, most importantly, that it was possible to heal from that betrayal and build something beautiful anyway. The goal isn't to forget what happened to you, I told my young clients. The goal is to integrate it into your story in a way that makes you stronger, not bitter. By the time I turned 32, I'd published 2 papers on childhood abandonment trauma and been invited to speak at conferences around the country. My practice was thriving, my marriage was solid, and my children were happy and secure. I'd created exactly the life I'd dreamed of during those dark years after the train station. I thought I'd left my past completely behind. I was wrong. It started with a LinkedIn notification on a Tuesday morning in March. Someone had viewed my profile, a professional headshot of me smiling in my office, my credentials listed beneath my name, a brief bio mentioning my specialization in childhood trauma and my work with families. The viewer's name was listed as Jake Thompson. My blood turned to ice. Jake Thompson. My brother. The brother who'd been at his friend's house while our parents drove me to Grand Central Station. The brother who'd never tried to find me, never asked social services where I'd gone, never seemed to wonder if I was alive or dead. I stared at the notification for a full minute, my hands shaking. Then I blocked the profile and tried to go about my day. But the damage was done. For the first time in years, my carefully constructed peace was cracking. If Jake had found me, it was only a matter of time before they did too. The missed calls started 3 days later. Unknown numbers, always calling during work hours when they knew I'd be busy. They never left voicemails, just hung up when my answering service picked up. But I knew. Somehow, I knew it was them. I changed my office number. They found the new one within a week. Dr. Thompson? My receptionist, Kelly, poked her head into my office. There's a woman online too who says she's your mother. She's very insistent. My throat closed up. Take a message. Tell her Dr. Thompson is not available. Kelly hesitated. She said to tell you that your family misses you and wants to talk. She sounds upset. Family, as if we'd ever been a family, as if they had any right to that word after what they'd done. Take the phone off the hook, I managed. Cancel my afternoon appointments. I need to go home. I drove to my house in the suburbs, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. David was at the hospital, the kids were at school. I had a few hours to fall apart in private before I had to pull myself together and pretend everything was fine. But when I turned onto my street, my blood froze all over again. There, parked across from my house, was a blue SUV. Different from the one they'd driven me to the station in 20 years ago, but unmistakably similar. And standing on my front porch, pressing my doorbell over and over again, were two people I recognized despite the years that had passed. My parents. Here, at my home, where my children lived. I parked in my driveway and sat in my car for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. They'd seen me pull up. I watched my mother's face light up like Christmas morning as she hurried down my front steps. Sarah! Oh my God, Sarah, you look so beautiful. You look so successful. She was older, of course. Gray streaks in her hair, lines around her eyes, a softness around her middle that hadn't been there before. But her voice was exactly the same. That bright, artificially cheerful tone she'd used to tell me about my adventure at Grand Central Station. My father hung back, looking uncomfortable but not apologetic. Never apologetic. I got out of my car slowly, my legs unsteady. How did you find me? Oh, sweetheart, it wasn't easy. We've been looking for you for years. Jake found your professional profile online, and we hired a private investigator to— Stop. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Just stop talking. My mother's smile faltered. Sarah, honey, I know you must be angry, but— Angry. I laughed, but it sounded nothing like humor. You think I'm angry? We can explain everything, my father said, stepping forward. We were young, we made mistakes, but we never stopped loving you. The casual rewriting of history was breathtaking. You abandoned me at a train station. When I called you crying and scared, you pretended not to know who I was. It was complicated, my mother said, wrapping her arms around herself. We thought it would help you become more independent. You thought what? That a 12-year-old should be able to navigate the city alone? That abandoning your child was good parenting? You turned out fine, my father said, gesturing at my house, my car, the obvious markers of my success. Look at you. You're a doctor. You have a beautiful home. You're obviously doing well. Maybe our method was unconventional, but it worked. The audacity of taking credit for my success I'd achieved despite them, not because of them, left me speechless for a moment. Get off my property, I said quietly. Sarah, please. My mother stepped closer, and I noticed she was crying. We're your parents. We love you. We've always loved you. No. My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by 20 years of therapy and hard-won self-knowledge. Parents don't abandon their children. Parents don't pretend their children don't exist when they call for help. Parents don't disappear from their children's lives and then show up decades later expecting gratitude. But we're family, my mother whispered. Family? I pulled out my phone and showed them my lock screen, a photo of David, Emma, and Michael at the beach last summer, all of us laughing and tan and completely happy. This is my family. These are people who would never, ever abandon each other. People who show up when things get hard instead of running away. My father's face was getting red. You can't cut us out forever, Sarah. We have rights. We're your parents. You gave up your rights when you drove away from Grand Central Station, I said. You lost the privilege of calling me your daughter when you decided I was disposable. I turned to walk toward my front door, but my mother grabbed my arm. Please, Sarah, we're getting older. We want to know our grandchildren. We want to be part of your life again. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. My children will never know you exist, just like you pretended I didn't exist when I needed you most. I pulled free and walked to my door, my hand steady as I turned the key. If you contact me again, if you come to my house again, if you try to approach my children, I will call the police and file a restraining order. Stay out of my life. I closed the door and locked it, then watched through the peephole as they stood on my porch for another few minutes, arguing in hushed voices. Finally, they walked back to their SUV and drove away. But I knew they'd be back. People like my parents didn't give up easily, especially when they'd convinced themselves they were the victims in this story. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, they tried everything. They called my office until I changed the number again. They sent flowers to my house with cards begging for one conversation. They tracked down Martha Henderson and called her, demanding she convince me to see them. Martha hung up on them. They found my husband's office and called there. They researched my children's school and showed up at a soccer game, trying to approach Emma until other parents intervened. They even hired a lawyer to send me a letter about grandparents' rights. Each contact felt like a violation, like they were trying to crawl back into the life I'd built without them. But instead of making me want to reconcile, their persistence only reinforced everything I'd learned about them in therapy. They were selfish. They were manipulative. They viewed my boundaries as obstacles to overcome rather than reasonable requests to respect. The final straw came on a Thursday evening. David was working late, and I was helping the kids with homework when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see a delivery driver or a neighbor. Instead, I saw my brother Jake. He looked so much like our father it was unsettling. The same dark hair, the same sharp jawline, the same slightly superior expression I remembered from childhood, but his eyes were uncertain, almost pleading. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "What do you want, Jake?" "To talk to you, just for a few minutes." "About what?" He shifted uncomfortably. "About Mom and Dad, about what happened." I was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "What did happen, Jake? What's your version of the story?" "They told me you ran away," he said quietly. "They said you'd been acting out, getting in trouble, and one day you just left. They said they tried to find you but couldn't." The lie was so complete, so thorough, that I almost laughed. "And you believed that? You believed your 12-year-old sister just vanished into thin air and that was normal?" His face flushed. "I was 16, Sarah. I was dealing with my own stuff. And they seemed really upset about it. They seemed upset that I was gone? Yeah, Mom cried for weeks. Mom cried." I repeated the words like I was tasting something bitter. "Jake, they didn't look for me because they knew exactly where I was. They put me there." I told him everything, about the train station, about the phone call, about the way they'd laughed as they drove away. I watched his face change as he realized that everything he'd believed about my disappearance was a lie. "That's impossible," he whispered. They couldn't." "Call them," I said, pulling out my phone. "Call them right now and ask them to tell you exactly what happened the day I disappeared. Ask them about Grand Central Station. Ask them about the $20 and the adventure. Ask them about hanging up on me when I called crying for help." Jake's hands were shaking as he dialed. I couldn't hear both sides of the conversation, but I could see his face crumble as he asked the questions and heard the answers. When he hung up, he was crying. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I should have questioned it. I should have looked for you myself. You were a kid too, I said, and I meant it. They manipulated you just like they manipulated me. The difference is, you gotta stay. Why? He asked. Why did they keep me and throw you away? It was a question I'd asked myself countless times over the years. Dr. Chen and I had explored various theories. Maybe I'd reminded them of a relative they didn't like. Maybe I'd been more challenging as a child. Maybe they'd simply decided 2 children were more than they wanted. I don't know, I told Jake, and I don't care anymore. The why doesn't matter. What matters is that they did it, and now they want to pretend it never happened. Jake wiped his eyes. They want me to convince you to see them. They say the family isn't complete without you. The family was never complete, Jake. It was always broken. I just finally got healthy enough to see it. He nodded slowly. What can I do? How can I fix this? You can't, I said gently. This isn't your mess to clean up. But if you want a relationship with me, if you want to know your niece and nephew, it has to be separate from them. I won't have my children around people who are capable of abandoning a child. I understand, he said. And Sarah? For what it's worth, you turned out amazing. You're everything they should have been proud of. After Jake left, I sat in my kitchen and called Dr. Chin. Even though I hadn't seen her in regular sessions for years, she'd told me I could always reach out if I needed support. How are you feeling about all this contact? She asked after I'd filled her in. Stronger than I expected, I said honestly. 20 years ago, seeing them would have destroyed me. Now I just feel sad for them. They threw away something precious and they don't even understand what they lost. And you know what you gained. I know what I built, I corrected. I built a real family. I built a career helping kids like me. I built a life worth living, and none of it was because of them. That night, I called Martha and Jim Henderson to let them know what was happening. Martha was furious on my behalf, but Jim was philosophical. Some people spend their whole lives running from their past, he said, but you turned around and faced yours head on. That takes courage most people don't have. I had good teachers, I told him. You had good instincts, he replied. We just helped you trust them. The next morning, I got an email from Jake. He'd called our parents and told them he knew the truth about what they'd done to me. He'd told them that if they ever contacted me or my family again, they'd lose him too. The harassment stopped immediately. Apparently, they couldn't bear the thought of losing another child. Even though they'd thrown one away without a second thought, they weren't willing to risk the one they'd kept. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months later, I got a text from Jake telling me that our father had had a heart attack. He's asking for you, the message said. He says he wants to apologize before it's too late. I stared at the text for a long time, thinking about the 12-year-old girl who would have dropped everything to rush to his bedside. The girl who would have been grateful for any crumb of attention, any acknowledgement that she mattered. But that girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that some apologies come too late and some relationships are too broken to repair. I texted back, I hope he recovers, but his apology is 20 years too late. Jake wrote back immediately, I understand. I love you, sis. It was the first time anyone from my birth family had told me they loved me since I was 12 years old. But by then, I already knew I was loved. I'd learned it from the Hendersons, from David, from my children, from the dozens of clients who'd trusted me with their trauma and healing. I'd learned that love isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choice. It's about showing up again and again, especially when things get hard. It's about protecting the people who matter to you, not abandoning them when they need you most. My parents had made their choice 20 years ago at Grand Central Station, and now, finally, I was at peace with mine.